they can see the transaction happening and they can see where it's going to, but they physically cannot stop that. I think that is probably Bitcoin's claim to fame right there.
Yeah.
No one can stop it.
All right. So we are live with John, and John's got a really interesting story on basically the utility that Bitcoin's serving now. And we'll just get into it. John, I want to know, basically, I'd love for you to start from the beginning of sort of how you got into Bitcoin. Were you financially savvy? Were you into finance? And basically just go from there. I'd like to know basically how this all started.
Cool, Matt. Yeah, happy to chat about that. So I think just to kick off, so I'm not a financial guy at all. Growing up as a kid, money was one of those things in our household that the parents didn't talk about money in front of the kids. It was kind of weird. And the only financial advice I ever got from my parents was you have to save your money. Mm-hmm. And when I said, okay, fine, well, what am I saving it for? I never got an answer to that question. So that was about as far as my financial education went. Went to school, high school, finished school, and I went and studied a undergrad degree. And I started working for a family-owned business. And my uncle who started the business was going on about this book from a guy called Robert Kiyosaki. He's an American, I think Hawaiian American. Yep. And he wrote a book called Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And it was actually the very first non-fiction business book I ever read. And that was an amazing book to me. I ended up reading the 2 or 3 other books that he published in that series. But I remember one of the things that he said quite clearly, and I think it was his 3rd book, which was Rich Dad's Guide to Investing. He was saying, when he looks to invest in companies, he looks to research the directors of the company, what their track record was before they joined this company. He looks at the company itself, what the company's track record was, what are the projects the company's working on. He just tries to build this big picture about who's involved in the company and where's this company going before he sort of invests in it. And one of the parts of the book, he said, if you don't do that, essentially you're just gambling. And that sort of always stuck with me. And I remember going through the one property bubble. I mean, I'm from a small country in Africa. There was a property bubble that happened there. And a friend of mine who's in the property development game, he said to me, when everybody is around the barbecue and they're all telling you how to make money out of property, then you're in a bubble. Then you better watch it. And that was another thing that stuck with me. And the only reason I'm saying that is because my first experience with Bitcoin was driving down the road and seeing posters stuck onto street lampposts down the road that were saying how to make money out of Bitcoin. Mm-hmm. And I thought, well, if we've come to the point where people are telling you on street poles how to make money out of this thing, this sounds a bit like everyone standing around a barbecue telling you how to make money out of property.
Right. What was that about? If I can ask, what time frame are we talking here? When was that?
Sure. This is probably around about, I think it was just after the first bull run or during the first bull run. So it must have been, 2014, 2015 or something like that.
Yeah.
Anyway, so that was kind of my first introduction to Bitcoin. I remember noticing on 1 or 2 websites that you could have a pay with Bitcoin little icon on it. So I sort of thought, oh, well, that's interesting. And that's as far as it got. So I really didn't know anything about Bitcoin. But when it came to the 2017 or 2018 bull run, well, then a whole lot of people started talking about it. I had friends of mine that were talking about it, and they were showing me how they were making money hand over fist with this thing. And every time I asked them, well, what is it? What are you actually investing in? And none of them could answer the question. And that got me thinking about the Robert Kiyosaki quote about if you don't understand what you're investing in, you're essentially gambling.
Right.
And I've never been interested in trading. It's just not something that's for me. Some people have made good money out of it, but it's just not a topic I'm too interested in. So the whole idea of Bitcoin as a speculative asset just to be traded, buy low, sell high, it wasn't too interesting to me.
Mm-hmm.
But one day I was having another barbecue, how all good ideas start.
Absolutely.
And one of my friends who was there, he's a guy that I really respect, very wise guy. And the topic of Bitcoin came up. I can't remember what brought it up, but I sort of gave my 2 cents worth, which was basically worth nothing because I didn't really know anything about Bitcoin. And this friend of mine looked at me and he said, Bitcoin is the hardest money that's ever been invented. And that really struck a note with me. That was the first time anybody could tell me anything about Bitcoin that wasn't number go up.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I said, well, what do you mean? So he started just casually talking about, what is hard money? What makes up hard money? And then he put me onto a couple of resources. I think the first book I read was Thank God for Bitcoin. And then quickly onto the Bitcoin Standard, and then a couple of podcasts. I then jumped onto the Michael Saylor series with Robert Breedlove, the Jason Lowry stuff. And yeah, it's pretty much, that's it. It's every sort of day I think about this thing. It's like a worm that's dug a hole into it's just buried into my mind. I just can't stop thinking about it.
So if you can, back to Robert Kiyosaki, knowing what you're investing in, if you could pick, one sort of tenet of Bitcoin, what was it that you really, whether it's the cryptography or the security, or, we all have these similar questions starting out. What was it that really gripped you about? Was it the hard money aspect, or what about hard money really rang a bell for you?
Yeah, I think it was pretty much started by the Thank God for Bitcoin book, which started the discussion about what is money. And in fact, I think the audio book is actually narrated by Robert Breedlove. I think he was one of the authors of that book. Mm-hmm. And I mean, I had never thought about money like that before. And, he's got that podcast, which is called What is Money? And it's such a great question. And that was the first time I think I sat down and listened to somebody actually explain money as a utility, as a tool, why we have it, and what makes it good. So it was probably just the idea of hard money. I'd never thought of it before. And funny enough, although, I mean, like I said, I'm not a financial guy at all, but I remember being in high school, like junior high, and trying to understand what inflation was. I just couldn't quite understand why everything had to go up. So, where I come from, there's this, every year the prices go up. All the suppliers send you a letter and they say, look, inflation is up to whatever it is, 5%, 6%, 7%. So we are asking for an 8% increase for the cost of our goods and services. And then everyone comes for their wage increase and they say, hey, well, inflation is at 5 or 6 or 7%. So we want some inflation related increase. And I remember just as a kid, just this weird thing, I couldn't understand what inflation was. And I try to, in my naivety, work it backwards to say, well, what would be the root of inflation? And I went back all the way down to sort of an agricultural example of, you have the farmer. The farmer's got this piece of land. Now, the land hasn't increased in value. The land didn't get more expensive. The farmer is planting his grain. He uses farm equipment to harvest it, fair enough, and he's got some staff laborers, but I couldn't really see what was causing this increase. I didn't understand that money is inflated intentionally, at whatever the percentage is. I think here in the US, they sort of aimed at 2% or something. In the country I come from, it was sort of somewhere between, 4 and 7%. That was their target. But so just not really understanding it, but always having this weird awareness that something was weird, and then reading the book that was a Bitcoin book that sort of actually explained it. That was probably my orange pill moment.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. So I'd love to hear in your own words too, because we've all, like, once you go down the rabbit hole of reading some of these books, we all have our own conception of what makes a good money. But I'd like, if you don't mind, just explaining it in your own words, because sometimes it takes, until I got it, I probably heard it 20 times, until sort of it made, it clicked in my head. So maybe take a go if you wouldn't mind in your own words.
Sure. So, I think it depends who you listen to. Some people have 5 attributes, some people have a bit more. But I think at the end of the day, it boils down to, hard money is something that needs to be a fixed supply, or has to increase at a very low rate. I think gold is the example where the global gold supply increases at something like 2% per year. So it's a very small rate of increase. It needs to be difficult to reproduce. It needs to be easy recognizable. It needs to be a unit of account, a store of value, something that can be used for transactions and something that can be used for settlements as well. So yeah, all those. But I think at the end of the day, the inflationary part seems to be what has failed money time and time again. The gold standard was great, but the weakness with the gold was the settlement. It was very difficult for instant settlement with gold. You just simply can't shift gold across internationally as quickly as you may need to. So obviously people print a paper receipt to represent the gold. It's easier to move the paper receipt. But yeah, I think that those were the main things about the Bitcoin as a currency that were interesting. I do enjoy technology as well. So the idea of it being a technologically driven thing was interesting. And, the country I come from, there are exchange controls. You aren't allowed to move money, your own money, out of the country. You're restricted on what you can move out. And they've got these KYC laws on all the accounts, and it's getting more and more onerous with time. So you feel like you've got this the state that is constantly trying to just keep you in place, and they do that by withholding your access to your assets. And the idea of being able to send money or send Bitcoin to anybody in the world pretty much instantly if it's on the Lightning Network, or within, call it an hour maximum if you're on the base layer on Bitcoin itself, was really interesting. I mean, it's not a unique idea. I mean, people can send funds around the world, but what's different is the government, no one can stop you. They can see the transaction happening and they can see where it's going to, but they physically cannot stop that. And I think that is probably, Bitcoin's claim to fame right there.
Yeah.
No one can stop it.
So I think here in the US, that's such a novel, perspective for us, because you kind of grow up with access, email, identity. It's being the globally dominant currency has its perks. So I think you're kind of going into this, but you told me one time that you're more or less feeding your family with Bitcoin. Is that sort of, I don't know how much you want to go into it, but expand on that a little bit.
Yeah, sure. So I'm in the US at the moment. I'm here with my family. We've arrived. We're essentially immigrants in the US. We're looking to start working here, build up a new life. However, most of our money is not here in the US with us, and that's simply because we can't get it here. So when I was back in Africa, I was actually messing around with Lightning. I started running my own Lightning node, just getting a handle on the technology, opened up some channels, messed around. And little did I know that was going to serve me well a few years later when I arrived in the US. So, through the marvel of this Bitcoin invention, I can actually buy Bitcoin in my home country, and I can send it to my Lightning node. And my Lightning node is sitting here in the US at the moment. Once the Bitcoin's on the Lightning node, I'm able to convert that into US dollars by buying gift cards. And there are websites that sell gift cards, Bitrefill, the Bitcoin Company, amongst others. And for pretty much any large US chain store would have a gift card that you could buy on there. There are even MasterCard gift cards. So I have been taking money from Africa, turning it into Bitcoin, sending it to my node instantly. I use that to purchase a MasterCard with US dollars on it.
Mm-hmm.
And then I can walk into any store in the US. I can buy, I was at Starbucks earlier today and I just bought coffee on my US dollar MasterCard.
Right.
And I can even have the card physically printed and shipped to me if I choose to have a physical card. But I just keep the card on my digital wallet on my phone.
Sure.
And that is basically how I'm feeding my family at the moment. I take this money and I go through to whatever the store is, whether it's Kroger's or Walmart or Publix, and I buy groceries and I pay for it using my digital MasterCard.
Wow. Yeah, that's amazing. I think here in the U.S. that's sort of, it's so foreign because I don't think we see, we don't have those barriers, to identity and banking that a lot of countries worldwide have. So I might switch gears just to finish up here. It sounds like you've taken a similar, or my trajectory was, in 2017 I was just gambling on Bitcoin, arbitraging the exchange, and then basically I went circuitously into altcoins. I did some NFT stuff and kind of made my way back to Bitcoin. I'm curious as to your thoughts on, is Bitcoin the only one, or is there room for multi-chain? Where do you stand on that concept?
When I started to hear about Bitcoin, I started hearing about some other coins because these friends of mine that were trading Bitcoin were also trading the other coins. So I'd heard of Ethereum. I knew it was the second biggest cryptocurrency out there. And then I'd heard of Monero and Cardano and a couple of the others. Mm-hmm. But fortunately, quite early on in this research I was doing into Bitcoin, it became very clear to me that Bitcoin is pretty much the only one that actually does what it says it's going to do. Right. And it's been interesting watching Twitter and all the other social media feeds that send information to you on different cryptocurrencies, and you can kind of see them, not doing so well. And the issue about exchanges has been interesting as well. The exchanges collapsing, the whole FTX thing. I wasn't around with the Mt. Gox stuff. That was before my time, but I believe that was the first big shock to the system.
Yeah.
I think to answer the question, I pretty much started on Bitcoin, quickly realized that was about the only one I was interested in, and pretty much stuck with it.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, awesome. John, thanks for your story. I think that'll do it. But be in touch, and I appreciate all that you shared. Thanks, man.
Awesome, Matt. Great chatting. It's been awesome.